If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Hello, friends and brave leaders. Welcome back to the Small Brave Moves podcast. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the third of the 5 tough talks, and one that every leader must learn to master, the what's going on conversation. This is all about recognizing and addressing shifts in behavior, performance, or relationships within your team. Let me set the stage with a story from my own experience. Years ago, I was hired by GE Aviation to facilitate a high-stakes meeting with British Airways. The relationship between the two companies had grown strained over the years, and negotiations for a new deal had stalled for almost 12 months. My role was to facilitate a workshop to share best practices from GE Aviation and hopefully reignite those talks. It was clear from the very first session that something was off. The British Airways leaders were not engaging. They were checking their phones and sitting far away from the GE team. So I decided to pause and pivot and explore what might be going on. It was a risky move, but I knew we had to get to the heart of what was really happening, which happened to be the history between the two companies, getting both sides to open up about what had gone wrong in the past. And as we dug deeper, it became clear that the leaders at British Airways were holding on to some frustrations from nearly a decade earlier. Meanwhile, the new leadership at GE had no idea this history even existed because they had recently taken on those new roles. So it was time for a what's going on conversation. And after addressing the elephant in the room, we were able to align both sides and start building towards a future together, rebuilding that trust and crafting agreements on what was going to be most important to both sides as they continue to work together. Listen, by the end of the session, we celebrated the fact that negotiations would resume, and it was such a powerful reminder of the importance of addressing shifts before they turn into deeper issues. It's also such a good reminder that we can always go back to the how we work conversation. So we may start off with a what's going on and end up finishing with a how we work conversation. So the what's going on conversation is all about exploring changes in someone's behavior, performance, or relationships within your team. It may seem straightforward, but these talks can get messy for a couple of reasons. First, they often tap into emotional territory because you're addressing a problem. Second, many leaders just don't know how to begin this type of conversation. So they either avoid it or approach it in a way that leads to defensiveness rather than resolution. So how do you know when it's time to have a what's going on talk? Well, let's break it down into 3 key areas where shifts can happen so you're aware of what might be going on. The first one is behavior. This is where you're starting to see a change in behavior, and most times it's subtle in the beginning. Maybe someone who used to be punctual is now consistently late to meetings, or someone who actively participated has grown quieter and less responsive. These shifts are easy to spot and also easy to ignore. Number 2, performance. This is when you're noticing a trend in declining work quality or missed deadlines. It's more than just a one-off slip. It's an ongoing issue that's dragging down the person's performance. Number 3, relationships. Sometimes you'll notice a shift in how someone is interacting with you or the rest of the team. Maybe they're no longer participating in group discussions, but are talking about the meeting afterward with the colleagues, which is a big no in our agreements. This could also signal something's brewing beneath the surface. So if you choose to ignore these changes, you risk allowing the problem to grow into something so much bigger. The person may assume you've noticed, but don't even care enough to say anything. And before you know it, that situation escalates and you're forced into a more serious conversation, one about maybe being better or even moving on. So, unlike other tough talks, the how we work or the ask, the goal of what's going on is to gain resolution. And there are 3 essential steps to make sure this happens: building for understanding, building for alignment, and building for action. So, the first one is building understanding. And to kick off this conversation, you'll want to share your observations without being confrontational. This is where a lot of leaders trip up. They either avoid the issue by casually asking, "Oh, how are you?" which almost always gets a surface level response, or they come into a strong, "What's wrong?" which can put the other person on the defensive. So instead, I want you to focus on your observations. For example, you might say, "I've noticed you've been quieter in a meeting lately, and I'd like to understand what's going on." This sets a neutral tone and invites a more open conversation. One great piece of advice comes from Denise Bianca, Chief HR Officer for GE Vernova. She suggests starting with something like, "I value our relationship and would like to see it get stronger," or "We need your brain power on our team." These statements show that you're invested in the other person's success and want to help them grow. Step 2, building alignment. Once you've started the conversation, now the goal is to align on what's happening. So both of you need to acknowledge the situation, discuss your individual perspectives. It's important to listen carefully and not jump to conclusions. Don't try to jump in and fix it right away. Maybe there's a personal issue at play, or maybe the other person simply just needs more support at work. Whatever the case is, this step is about exploring those underlying issues together. Step 3, build action. Finally, the conversation needs to end with a clear plan of action. And when it comes to behavior or performance issues, the person should be the one to suggest the solutions. As the leader, you can help refine the plan, but they need to take ownership of the next steps. If you solve it for them, you will miss out on the ownership component. If it's a relationship issue, it might be time to revisit the how we work rules to realign again. The what's going on conversation is challenging because it really forces both parties to confront an uncomfortable reality. But when done right, it prevents small issues from escalating into major problems. It's about catching those subtle shifts in behavior, performance, or relationships before they spiral out of control. So if you've noticed a shift in someone on your team, it's time. It's time to have that brave conversation. Approach it with curiosity, not judgment. Start with a neutral observation and then build understanding, build alignment, and build action. Trust me, the more you practice these conversations, the easier they become, and the more respected you'll be as a leader. Remember, brave leaders address issues head on with empathy and intention. I hope this conversation on the What's Going On talk gives you the confidence to approach those tough situations with clarity and compassion. I want you to think about the what's going on conversation you might have been avoiding or thinking, if I just give it a few more days, it'll take care of itself, but yet here we are. And go practice, script, and have this conversation. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit from it.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.